As we continue solving quadratic equations, we're going to look at factoring to solve a quadratic equation. And, which is one step beyond what we've been doing, which is solving using our inverse operations and finding square roots. But remember, the multiplication property of 0 states that when a real number is multiplied by 0, the product is 0. So if I take 14...
Good morning, Mr. Jackson.
14 times 0, and that is going to be 0. So anything multiplied by 0 is going to be 0. But and then the converse of that property is that the zero product property states that if the product is 0, then at least one of the factors must be 0. So if I have x times y equals 0, I know then that one of these items has to be equal to 0 in order to get the product of 0. And that's where we're looking at this factoring. And remember, when we factor, we're breaking that standard form up into its prime factors, and one of those factors must be equal to 0. And that's where we're going to be working with when we're working with factoring these quadratics to solve for 0. And remembering that when we are solving this, the standard form of a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c. And normally that would be y equals, because that's my equation or function. But we're going to be solving, so y is going to be equal to 0. So as I solve, I know that I am solving for x is going to equal something. And when I transition that to an ordered pair, of course, it would be y is going to be 0, and then whatever my x value is. And that's what we have been covering, and we're just sort of trying to bring it together for you, or to show you where we're going, should I say. So looking at number 1 here, using the zero product property, well, I have x plus 1 times, or the parentheses, x plus 1 times x minus 5 equal to 0. And as we said, that we know then that one of these factors has got to be equal to 0 in order for the product to be 0. So I just solve for 0 using the zero product property. I have x plus 1 is going to be equal to 0, or I have x minus 5 is going to be equal to 0. I did my inverse operations, and I found that x is equal to -1, or x is going to be equal to 5. And if you substitute that back in, if I substitute in -1, then this becomes 0, which would make this entire product 0. Or 5 minus 5 would become 0. And then again, there I find my solution of 0. So that's what we're doing, is we're creating these solving for 0. So again, I have one product one prime product times another. So I would have 2x plus 3 is going to be equal to 0, or x minus 4 is going to be equal to 0. And now I just have to solve them. And of course, if I do my inverse operations, I have minus 3 on both sides. 2x is going to be equal to -3. And then I do my inverse operations, and I'm going to find out that x is going to be equal to -3/2. Or, doing the other one, solving for x, I have adding 4 to both sides, and x is going to be equal to 4. So I have either x is equal to -3/2, or x is going to be equal to 4. There you go. So again, solving for 0, and then working through the 1 or 2 step equation to find out what my possible solutions are. Again, here we are going to separate them and solve them for the value of 0. And I have 2y plus 1 times y plus 14 equals 0. So I will separate that into 2y plus 1 equals 0. Or y plus 14 could be 0. So solving either equation or both equations, doesn't matter which order I go in, I do my inverse operations to isolate my variable. And I have 2y is going to be equal to -1. I divide by the coefficient, continuing with my inverse operations. And I have y is going to be equal to -1/2. Or this other factor, I have minus 14 on both sides to isolate my y. And y is going to be equal to negative 14. So y could be negative 1/2 or y could be negative 14. So there we have it using the zero product property, and thankfully the quadratic right here, when they gave it to us in this first section, was already factored for us. Now sometimes we may have to do the factoring. And that's the reason that we covered factoring quadratic equations a few weeks ago, is because that's the one thing that is going to be, that's one of those skills that we are going to have to continue with. So that's why it was leading up to this factoring a polynomial and learning then how to find my solutions to a quadratic equation. So here, what are the solutions of each one of these equations? Well, in order to factor this quadratic equation, since the coefficient of our a is 1, it makes it very easy. So I am just looking for factors of negative 14 that will add to be 1, which my factors of negative 14, I'm sorry, not add to be 1. Factors of negative 14, which will add to be negative 5. So those factors turn out to be negative 7 and a positive 2. So there I'm able to quickly factor my quadratic, and m squared minus 5m minus 14 equals 0 becomes m minus 7 times m plus 2 equals 0. Then I go ahead and do my zero product property, making both of those factors equal to 0. So I have m minus 0, m minus 7 equals 0, so I do my inverse operations, and sure enough, m is going to be 7, and m plus 2, I subtract 2 from both sides, and m is minus 2. So here are my two possible solutions, and if you go back and check it, if you input it into either one of these, you'll see that those answers will result in 0. Now, so as we factor, again, factoring, you need practice with that. If it's not something you can do now easily, we need more practice. But so we go forward here, and I am looking for factors of negative 20, which when I add them together will give me a 1. And what that's going to end up looking like, hopefully you know that negative 20, well, we're going to have a 4 and we're going to have a 5 will be my factors of 20, and I need it to be a positive 1, so negative 4 times 5 will give me negative 20. Negative 4 plus 5 gives me a positive 1. So those are going to be my factors. So I have p minus 4 and p plus 5. Again, it's easy to factor this one quickly because of the coefficient of p squared is going to be just 1. So when I go to factor these, of course, I'm going to have p minus 4 equals 0, or p plus 5 is going to be equal to 0. And adding 4 to both sides, p is going to be equal to 4, or subtracting 5 from both sides, p is going to be equal to negative 5. So there are my two possible answers, two possible solutions. Okay, continuing on. This one becomes a little bit more difficult because we do have a coefficient other than 1. So when I factor this, there's several ways that we've gone over factoring, and students have developed their own ways. But what I want to do is I want to multiply a times c, and I want the factors of a times c then to add up to be the b value. And I know that a equals 2, b equals negative 15, and c is going to equal 18. So 2 times 18 is going to give me 36. And the factors of 36 that add up to be b, which is negative 15, is going to be, well, I can go down the factor tree, right? Negative 1 and negative 36, that's negative 37, not so much. And here's my factors of 36, and negative 20 is not what we're looking for. Negative 2 times negative 8, not what we're looking for. Negative 3 times negative 12, well, that adds up to be 15, so that turns out to be the two factors we're looking for. So in this factoring by grouping, what we're going to do is we're going to end up splitting that negative 15 up so where we can factor. So my factor, so I have 2a squared minus 3a minus 12a plus 18 equals 0. So only thing I did was rewrote my terms to where negative 15, I split those up. So now I can do factoring by grouping, and when we're factoring by grouping, we take the first two terms and we group them together, and the second two terms and we group them together. This is the method that I show because it's a process that you can follow. Some students have their own methods, and there's different methods to do it. And guessing and checking, there's many methods bottoms up, but this is what I give students because you can follow this process. If you've developed your own method, that's great, or you have a method that works for you, that's great. I just do this. You may be able to skip these steps as you get more proficient. So going back again, that grouping the first two terms, my greatest common factor is going to be a. So I can factor out a, and I leave behind 2a minus 3. The greatest common factor in my second two terms, well, if I did it right, I'm going to have 2a minus 3. So my greatest common factor there should be, I believe, negative 6. So if I factor out a negative 6, I have 2a times negative 6 is going to give me negative 12a, and then negative 3 times negative 6 is going to give me 18, so that's right. And I go ahead and I regroup these, and I have a minus 6 times 2a minus 3 equals 0. And now I'm to a point where I can use my zero product property. So I have a minus 6 equals 0, or 2a minus 3 equals 0. Doing my inverse operations, I'm going to add 6 to both sides, and a is going to be equal to 6. Or, on the other side, I have 2a minus 3. Doing my inverse operations, I add 3 to both sides, and I have 2a equals 3. I'm going to go ahead and divide by the coefficient, and a is going to be equal to 3 halves, or a is equal to 6. There you go. And there is my possible solutions. Again, factoring, we're to the point now that factoring should be very quick. You know, this process right here should take you less than 30 seconds because we have gotten enough practice that you can do it. If you take a little bit longer than that, each additional problem is going to be a little bit longer, but we have to practice. And for those of you that aren't practicing, well, you're never going to get to this point. Factoring is just a step in the total problem. It is not something that is meant to slow us down significantly. Okay, so here we go, factoring. In order to factor, my equation needs to be in standard form, and which is this equal to 0. So standard form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and as you can see here, I'm not equal to 0. None of these are equal to 0, so the only thing that happens is, first of all, you need to combine like terms before we get started. So we move our 18 in this first one. We have 4x squared minus 21x equals 18. So I go ahead and I do my inverse operations to get 18 to the other side. So I subtract 18 on both sides. Rewrite it in standard form. 4x squared minus 21x minus 18 equals 0. When I factored it, turns out that I have 4x plus 3 times x minus 6 equals 0. Again, if you're having trouble going from here to here, you need to go back and probably look at videos from 8.5 and 8.6, because that's where we really covered that. Now, so solving for my zero product property, I have 4x plus 3 equals 0. So I go ahead and do my inverse operations, minus 3 on both sides. I get 4x equals negative 3. Dividing by my coefficient, and x is going to be equal to negative 3/4. Or my other factor is going to be x minus 6. X minus 6 equals 0. Add 6 to both sides, x equals 6. So my two possible solutions are going to be x equals negative 3/4 or x equals 6. Now, so going through that, here we go. X squared plus 14x equals negative 14. I'm going to add 40 equals negative 49, sorry. I'm going to add 49 to both sides, and I rewrite that in standard form. X squared plus 14x plus 49 equals 0. A lot of students are going to forget to go to standard form first, but that's why we practice. Hopefully you guys recognize this as a perfect square, and we can factor that to x plus 7 times x plus 7 equals 0. Then going on, we know that x plus 7 equals 0 and x plus 7 equals 0. Well, these are going to be the same answer, so I don't need to process both of them. So when I do my inverse operations, I have -7, and subtracting 7 from both sides, x is going to be -7. So I only have one solution here. Okay, let's see, going on. I have factoring over here, c, so I have 3x squared minus, no, 3x squared plus 13x equals -4. Putting it in standard form, I need to add 4 to both sides. So I have 3x squared plus 13x plus 4 is going to be equal to 0. When you factor that, you're going to have, let's see, I can do some guessing and checking here, right? Well, I know that a times c is going to give me 12, so I could end up doing this. When I add this together, I know that 4 times 1 is going to give me 4. I know that 3x times x is going to give me 3x squared, and when I do the adding here, I get x and 12x, so that would be the factored form there, guessing and checking. So I go ahead and do my zero product property now, and I have 3x. Again, going from here to here, if you need practice factoring, go back and review 8-5, 8-6, because the factoring process is something that we are just doing. It's just one more step. So I have 3x plus 1 equals 0, and x plus 4 equals 0, so solving, do my inverse operations, and I have 3x equals -1, dividing both sides by 3, x is going to be equal to -1/3, or x plus 4 equals 0, do my inverse operations, and x equals 0, so bam, there you go. You have x equals -1/3, or x equals not 0, I'm sorry, 4. Okay, moving on. Let's see, where are we at? Looks like the next page. And oh my god, it's a stinking word problem. And I've gone and filled in some stuff here, so hopefully you can recognize what I've done for you. So it says here, you're constructing a frame for the rectangular photo. You want the frame to be the same width all the way around. The frame's going to be the same width all the way around, and the total area of the frame and photo to be 315 inches square. What should the outer dimensions of the frame be? Well, here's the frame width all the way around is unknown, and it's x. So we have the same width, x, all the way around. And we know that when I do this length right here, that it is going to be the length of 17 inches plus 1x plus 2x. That's how we come up with the length is 2x plus 17. Additionally, since the height of the picture is going to be 11 inches and the width of the frame is x on one side and x on the other, we know that the height is going to be 2x plus 11. And we just need to figure out what that frame width is going to be. And it says you want the frame width to be the same all the way around, x, and then the total area of the frame and photo is going to be this. So it looks like the total area is going to be length times width. So area is length times width, and my length is equal to 2x plus 17. My width is going to be equal to 2x plus 11, and my area, they said, is going to be equal to 315. So I just need to substitute in all of these values over here. So area equals 315. Length is going to equal 2x plus 17. And then width is going to equal 2x plus 11. So now I'm very close to having what I need, but I need to combine like terms, and this I need to move over to the other side, and these two factors are not ready. I need to be able to add that. You know, for example, if I subtract 315 from both sides, you know, and I got to be able to combine like terms, so I'm going to have to multiply just so I can subtract that. So I need to go ahead and put the other side into standard form. So when I do that, I have 315. So remember, standard form, I need to multiply the first term times all of that, the second term times all of that. So I get 4x squared plus 22x plus 34x plus, I don't know, 17 times 11. Somebody knows the trick of 11 and I don't. Like, let's see here. This would be 7, 1, 0, 7, 1, 7, 8, 1. So 187. Hope I did that right. Let me check my math. 1 times 7, 1 times 1. Space saver. 1 times 7, 1 times 1. 7, 8, 1. Okay, I checked it. So now I can go ahead and I'm going to combine like terms, and I'm going to move my 315 over to the other side all at the same time. So I have 0 is going to be equal to 4x squared plus 56x minus 315 plus 187. Gosh. I'm hoping it's going to be here 128. Negative 128. Let me check that here. That's 5, 1, 1, 3. Yeah, that looks good. Minus 128. Now I can go ahead and factor this. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the greatest common factor first, which is 4. That leaves behind x squared plus 14x minus 32. And that's going to make it much easier for me to factor this. So that is going to be x plus 16, x minus 2, and that's going to equal 0. And now what I can do is I can go ahead and solve for x using my factors here. So I'm going to bring this over here, and that is going to tell me that x plus 16 equals 0, or x minus 2 is equal to 0. So that's, of course, doing my simple inverse operations. X is going to be equal to negative 16, or x is going to be equal to 2. Now we're talking about length, and when it talks about real-world problems, reasonable solutions, it is not reasonable that x is equal to a negative number. So in this case, negative 16 is not a reasonable solution. So we're going to go ahead and take x is equal to 2. So the width of my frame will be 2 inches. And it says, what should the outer dimensions of the frame be? Well, if this length right here is 2x plus 17, well, that's going to be 2, and I replace the length of the frame, or the width of the frame, with 2, or x, sorry. 17 equals 4 plus 17 equals 21, so the length is going to be 21 inches. And then the width, doing the same thing, I have 2 times 2 plus 11, that's was my width. Substituting in the value of x, that is going to be 4 plus 11, which is 15 inches. So it is going to be 15 by 21 inches is going to be the overall outer dimension of my picture. Now it says, suppose that the total area of the frame of the photo should be 319 inches. Well, the only thing different here is we're going to end up, when we multiply it out, it's going to be 2x plus 17 times 2x plus 11, those are my dimensions, equals now the new area of 319. Well, we've already said that this is going to be 4x squared plus 56x minus, don't know, right? Plus 187 equals 391. Go ahead and minus on both sides. And then 4x squared plus 56x equals, here we go, is that point right here is going to be 56x minus 204 equals 0. So I'm going to go ahead and factor out my greatest common factor again, 4. So I'm going to end up with x squared plus 14x minus 20, no, 51, right? Minus 51 equals 0. So when I factor that, it's going to be x, my factors of negative 51, which will add up to give me 14, will be negative 17 and a positive 17 and a negative 3. 17 times 3, negative 3 is negative 51. 17 minus 3 is going to be 14. So doing my zero product property, x plus 17 equals 0, or x minus 3 equals 0. And then go ahead and add 3 to both sides. X equals 3. Looking at the other one, this is going to be subtracting 17 from both sides, and x cannot equal negative 17. So that's not going to be a choice. So the width of my frame is going to be 3 inches. 3-inch frame. And then what are the outer dimensions? Well, we take the length, which was 2 times x plus 17 equals, and my width was 2 times x plus 11 equals, substituting in the value of x, and then it turns out that the length is going to be 23 inches and the width is going to be 17 inches. And there you go, we're factoring, solving quadratic equations. Remember, using reasonable solutions, and reasonable solutions are not negative lengths, negative widths, negative times. You know, those things are always going to be our positive values.